Hey friends out there, Rob here. Today I want to share with you my live stream setup by taking you along with me for a behind the scenes look at how I set up for a live stream on a wedding. Today I'm actually flying solo, so I'm going to be using two cameras with one operator, that's me. I'm also going to be miking several different places, so we're going to try to see if we can get the audio out from the DJ that'll be there. And this is going to be indoors, so I'm going to have one static camera, one camera that I'm going to be pan tilt moving, and of course my wide angle. As we kind of look at this, I'll share with you how we get to it as we go along, and you get to see the gear that I'm using and how I feature that gear and how I implement it in order to get a really nice looking live stream. All of this will be able to be seen. I'll give you guys a link so you can check it out too in the description down below. And if you like this kind of video and you want to chit chat some more, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. Hit those Amazon links down below and I'll catch you guys on the other side. Let's get to it. Alright friends, I'm getting ready to put together some cameras. We're going to use the X2000. I put on my Atom 500 by Vaxis. That's my transmitter. Now I'm getting out the UX 180 as well as YoloBox and a transmitter. We're going to talk about all this stuff. It's time for me to put the gear on. I'm using the Sennheiser XSWD at this point. And then I go into a mode where I'm doing some sound checks with the DJ at the same time as running my network speed checks. And I'm getting 20 megabits per second upload almost, which is pretty nice. Now, that's going to have an impact on what I use later. We'll talk about that. But for right now, just give you a look around as you can kind of see. We've got a big, large crowd as everybody's getting there. I have not gone live at this point. And from there, we're going to go ahead and just show you, jump in a little bit further. I'm taking a picture here because I'm going to post that in one of the forums later just to show how YoloBox is doing a good job. At this point in time, we've been live streaming for quite some time. And I didn't even realize it, but I didn't focus the camera that's doing this B-roll stuff, so if it looks a little out of focus, it's just the way that it is. Everything works nice, and I'm going to do a couple of transitions here. And yeah, not too bad. I really enjoyed it. So let's talk about it. Guys, I guess this is a great time for me to say, if you're into this type of long, sprawling video where we talk about this stuff, great. Let's keep watching and talk about it in the comments below. If not, if you don't like this type of thing, then head on out. We'll do something else. Okay, so there was a lot going on. I was one of about 5 or 6 different vendors just providing services, not including live talent that was performing music from vocals and organists, as well as a saxophonist, right? So there was a lot going on. There was over 400 people, I believe, at this wedding, and there was at least 300 chairs inside, and then the back door was filled up and everybody was around, and you kind of saw that lots of people were coming in. So the thing that we're going to talk about here is just what the entire event was, right? As a live stream, there was a lot going on. And I guess I'm going to start with audio. I had originally planned on synchronizing my audio for the live stream, getting an XLR out using the Sennheiser XSWD. Now, the reason this is important is because the location where we were has house sound. They have a whole sound booth, house, it's set up for all that stuff. Except the fact that the house was actually not providing this service. They were providing only post amplification from the DJ, which means all of the microphones, all of the sound, all of the music was running through all of the DJ's equipment. And it was about 400 feet from where we were in the back of the venue area, the reception area, what you saw. And it's a multi-use area, so they're going to go from that and change that into the reception hall later. So everyone's going to exit and they're going to do some stuff. So there's some time hacks there with setup after the actual ceremony. But in that location, there were at least 8 different microphones that were going on, all transmitting wirelessly on the 2.4 gigahertz system. I didn't want to add additional mics to it, but I knew I had several solutions if I wanted to. But the easiest solution, of course, would have been to just jack in using my Sennheiser XSWDs on the XLR. Now, the DJ did a great job. He had all kinds of breakout cables in order to help out with that and was willing to give me the out that he needed. However, all of the outs that were on his soundboard, on his actual mixer, were used up. So he had an auxiliary mixer that was set up just to power his speakers. And lots of his speakers had stuff that would allow for pass-through from one set to another. And they were all gained up very high. In fact, they were gained up so high that no matter what setting I had on my camera coming in, my camcorder, I couldn't adjust the levels in order to get them low enough to get a good clean sound that I wanted. So I ended up not using the Sennheiser XSWDs, which meant that I had to go to my next solution. The next solution was this Comica wireless system. Now this is a brand new system by Comica, and I actually like it quite a bit. This is a 4-channel, 1 receiver wireless communication system. So it transmits no recording, and I was running all of these into my XSWD. Each one of these has small lavalier mics. Of course, they're powered, they're wireless, and they work on the 500 megahertz system, so it's a UHF system. Worked really well, except for the fact that the DJ already had 8 mics, which included wireless lavalier mics that he had placed everywhere. And so that meant that if I was going to put them on the bride or the groom, or more specifically, the groom, the pastor, the vocalist, and the saxophonist, then I was still going to be missing a channel, which I would then need to use my other 2.4 gigahertz system, the Sennheisers, in order to do some additional miking. And I just decided that that was going to be more than what I wanted to deal with at the time. So what did I do? I ended up using my other Sennheiser XSWDs, and these are lavalier systems, but they could plug in directly to my camcorder without me needing to go through the Zoom or anything else like that, and then I could use the lavalier connection and actually mic the DJ's speakers. Now I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, the audio was so far away. If I'm going to mic a speaker, if I put a microphone for an area microphone up by where people were speaking, and if I was putting that on the talent, well, I might come into a spot where I got echo or phase resonance because of the distance from the actual speakers of the house speakers, which were daisy-chained behind the sound block. In the sound chain, all the house speakers were set up after the DJ speakers. So they had already gone through a problem of having to adjust for latency from what the house was getting on the house broadcast speakers and what the DJ had for their speakers, which they had 2 sets of speakers, so 4 speakers set up. And then if I had another speaker on the, or if I had a microphone on the pastor, for say, when he was speaking, I would get that sound immediately, but then there might be some echo as the sound from the house came back through. And I didn't want to deal with any of that. I've dealt with that in the past, and I learned my lesson well not to. So I ended up just going ahead and using my 2 XSWD lavalier systems, which are an XLR system plugged straight into the camera, and I mic'd the speakers. Now, I've had a problem with one of my left channel, my groom mic, where I hear static from time to time. And in this instance, I was able to pinpoint that that particular microphone was having a difficult time jumping frequencies. However, my other microphone was not, the one I usually use for my pastor. And so during the ceremony, well actually prior to the ceremony, because it took so long for it to start, I was able to identify that immediately, and I was able to just mute that signal. Now, you might say, if you muted the signal, well, what happens? Well, there's a lot that happens, but first let me share with you this. I got to get this out. Okay, so when you're on your camera, I was using my XLR here and my XLR here, and I was, like I said, micing the speaker. So I was getting sound, and I was able to, at that point in time, no matter how loud the sound was, I was able to attenuate it, adjust the gain in order to get a proper -12 decibel regular sound on my monitor. But when I realized that one of my channels was not working correctly, in this case my left channel, my mic 1, I just immediately switched it over to duplicate my mic 2, the channel that was doing well. And that's part of our standard operating procedures. If we encounter and can identify which ear through the monitoring that there is a problem with the audio, we immediately switch over to the good audio and just double it up. That basically gives us mono instead of stereo, but this isn't really a stereo mono situation anyway, so that doesn't really matter. We really just want to have both ears, both sound channels coming in and broadcasting nicely. So although I did set up for 2, that redundancy allowed me to get good audio when I recognized that there was a problem. These are types of things that you might want to consider and think about for your own service when you're out there providing these services. What do you do when you identify that there's an issue? Now, the nice part about having 4-channel audio on the Comica would have been that I would have 4 channels to work with at that point in time. And in that instance, I only have 2 channels on my actual camcorder. Any of them, I don't have 4-channel audio in any of them. But on a device like the Zoom H6, I do have the ability to bring in those 4 individual inputs and then output that specifically to the camcorder via my line out. At this point in time, if I was able to identify that one of those microphones was doing something that I didn't want to, I could just turn the sound all the way down at the source here and be fine. So, although I had this to use it, I didn't need it, and it's the same principle. I went ahead and used that to make sure that I got good sound. Now, there's a little bit more that's going on here. The entire procession took about 30 minutes just to get everybody that needed to be walked down the aisle before the bride came down the aisle. And you guys can see that in the video that I'll share with you. Which meant that my placement of my cameras was very important. So, I have been in situations before where there was a videographer there, and they have chosen the premium spots or whatever. But for me, no, I went ahead and staked my claim right there at the dead center line of the path to walk down. And like I said, that was about 400 feet-ish in order for people to start in one spot and end up on stage, which meant that during the beginning of the ceremony, my B camera, the X2000, was actually facing back, so it could see the people as they walked down from a side perspective, and my A camera was actually situated in the center line looking down. That gave me the ability to look pan left to get them and track them as they walk down and then switch on YoloBox. We'll talk about how awesome YoloBox was for switching here in just a second. But what I want to talk about is why I chose to put which camera where. The X2000, great camera, I love it. Small sensor though for camcorders. The standard currently is about a 1-inch camcorder sensor. That's pretty much the standard. However, Panasonic made the X2000, X1500, CX10 all with the same sensor. It's 1/2.5. And it's got some great stuff in it. It's a wonderful camera, and I use it for a reason. I bought it for a reason. And I like using it, although the buttons irritate me. If you guys saw that video, you know. However, it also has something to kind of make up for that indoor low light problem. It's not very good indoors, and even if we don't think it's low light with our eyes, it definitely does. So it usually wants to ramp up the gain quite a bit. So a couple things. I went synchronized scan, so I was shooting at 24 frames a second in that camera, so I actually synchronized my shutter with 24 frames a second. Normally we would use the 180 rule, but I did not. And I also had the camera set at its pretty much its widest aperture, so I was using an aperture of f2 instead of f1.8, but most cameras in this range will be f2.8 to f4.5, so it was still pretty bright for its system. That allowed me to get nice, clear crystal audio or crystal video the way that I would want coming in, and everything was nice. Now, luckily we were in the same area with the same lighting, so there really wasn't a lighting difference for the cameras except for on my A camera when I panned left and saw the entrance of the brides and grooms and people coming through the atrium door, and beyond that door, of course, was natural daylight, and so that was a little bit of a different lighting condition. However, it didn't really make much of a difference because I was able to cut between the two pretty easily. Now, when we talk about what we were using YoloBox Pro here. Now, I got a couple different YoloBox. I always rock on roll with my Pro and my OG just in case one goes down. If you didn't know, YoloBox actually synchronizes between the systems. So when you create an event in one, it shows up on the other the minute you turn it on, and it jumps in and you synchronize it. It connects to the wireless network, and it'll show whatever you have on all of your YoloBox. So let's say you had 3 YoloBox and you create an event on one, that event will pop up on the others. Now, you can only live stream from one at a time, but if for some reason one YoloBox were to go down, or you needed to stop it for some reason, the other ones could pick up and continue from there as long as you paused your original recording or your original live stream on the YoloBox that went down. And if for some reason you run out of battery power while you're going, then it also will do exactly the same thing. Now, for YoloBox, here I was actually using an SD card video, and I have these SD card videos saved on the SD card. You'll see it in a second, and you can see, well, there's a lot of recordings. That's my recording of the entire event. But here you go, you get an SD card video right there. And so this is what I was playing is my waiting room video. So although we had about 45 minutes, I'm going to power this off now, where things didn't work out and start on time, we still had stuff to show there. And that's where that waiting room video comes into play. The other thing that's important here is I have a thing with my team, and even though I didn't have my team with me on this one, I still follow my own standard operating procedures. I have a thing called ABR, Always Be Recording. YoloBox should record internally, and your cameras should record internally. It's real simple. If the bride and groom say that they want to purchase an additional download, then you will have a 4K high quality download from the internal camera recordings that you recorded on, as well as whatever you recorded on in whatever quality you were streaming on YoloBox. In this instance, the bride and the groom chose not to purchase any download, and with my live streams, I will usually give the YoloBox internal recording completely unedited, other than stitched together in something like Premiere Pro as a download. Now, the reason that I do this, and I'll downscale it to 720p, by the way. The reason that I do this is twofold. Number one, sometimes people will attempt to purchase a live stream in replacement for an actual wedding ceremony video. I lose money when they do that, right? The live stream is a service, it's a live stream, it's a window into someone's wedding, and that's it. So that's the way I think about it. But clients always want something more. They're like, why can't you give more? So in order to just avoid all of that, I include the download from the SD card recording on YoloBox. I know for a fact that when my clients see that, they generally will choose to purchase the actual internal camera recordings that I'll make from the internal camera recordings, I guess I should say. In this instance, I didn't have a chance to meet with the bride and groom ahead of time, so they couldn't see those. I was booked just 2 weeks out because it's something they wanted as a last-minute thing. So I ended up, well, they didn't get a chance to see the two apart. But what I did do is I put in my contract that, hey, after 2 weeks, I'm going to delete the internal camera recordings. And that will mean that they won't be able to get an HD or a 4K recording. So I will put together a short clip of them saying I do, with the YoloBox on the right and of course the 4K on the left. You and I all know the 4K is going to look better, and I'll sell that for another $700 shortly after. It's a way to make some additional sales after the fact, and it also takes some of the financial pressure off the bride and groom, but they're going to want this. Although they may have purchased a wedding video, the videographer was not making a full ceremony video. And I mean, just to be honest, what would you rather have, the live stream or the 4K? Well, the 4K. And of course that means I'd have to edit it, but to make some money after the fact is good to go. So for me, that's just part of the standard operating procedure in the ABR Always Be Recording. Maybe it's helpful to you. Lots of things were going on here, but the reality was I needed to make sure that I could stream in the highest quality possible. And I ended up choosing an encoding rate of 24 frames per second, constant bit rate at 5 megabits per second, which is 5,000 kilobits per second. Now we saw that on the upload speed for the network testing. I did it 3 different times at prior to the start of the wedding, where I was able to ensure that I was getting around 20 megabits per second upload, which would be 20,000 kilobits per second. YoloBox is capable of recording at or YoloBox Pro definitely is capable of recording at 8,000 kilobits per second, 8 megabits per second. That's 60% higher. That's 160% the data rate of 5 megabits per second. So I could have recorded in a higher data rate and encoded and sent it out. The issue that I have with that is that I know 5 megabits or 5,000 kilobits a second looks good for HD video. I know that it looks good. And I know that YoloBox can support it pretty much wherever I go if I can get some kind of a stream. Judging by how many people were there, and I didn't know how many other people might attempt to live stream on their cell phones, and we were sharing the same network, I decided that I didn't want to push that additional bandwidth so that I wouldn't run the risk of choking out the stream. If I did run the risk of choking out the stream and I saw that I was dropping frames and things weren't looking right, I would have immediately paused the stream, not ended, paused, gone into my encoding settings and dropped them. I may have dropped resolution as well as bitrate, but starting at 5,000 kilobits a second, I could drop it down to around 3, and if I was still having that problem, I could then move to 720 at 2,000 kilobits per second and known that I would have gotten a good look. Had I been in a situation where I wasn't getting that kind of throughput in the first place, I would not have done that at all. I would have just streamed at 720 at the highest kilobit rate that I possibly could and then brought it down from there. When I did my testing for my internal SIM card on YoloBox, I've got T-Mobile, I was only getting about 5 megabits, which is around 5,000 kilobits per second upload, and I definitely did not trust my cellular signal connection to do the 5,000 kilobits, 5 megabits per second. This was a great decision because it turns out that I had 0 dropped frames, looking at it through the YouTube analytics afterwards, looking at it on YoloBox Pro, and it just chugged right along. I ended up streaming for a total of like 97 minutes, so an hour and 37 minutes, and over half of that time was, well, of course, as you know, half that time was what I consider dead air. We were just waiting. So it was 9 minutes of waiting room video, and then about 40 minutes or 33 or 4 minutes of audience until the actual wedding began. That's a lot to think about, you know, and these things are all popping forwards. And I don't necessarily have a checklist that I have memorized, but I've shown you guys in the past I have a shot list. And just because of the way things are working right now, I can show you that my videography shot list right here is something that I use when I'm out there streaming to help me go and make sure that it looks nice. You know, that I cross my T's and dot my I's, so to speak. Now, while I was streaming, people had gone to the website, and I had over 150 people watching at the time that I began streaming, and by the time that it ended, I think it capped around 200 people that were watching from afar. Turns out some of the people in the booth were actually watching the live stream, and they were totally impressed. They wanted to know about YoloBox, and that's the thing. People ask these questions all the time. Whenever they see YoloBox, it is a game changer when you're on location. And this is not an advertisement for YoloBox, right? This is me just sharing with you my experiences using it. In fact, none of this is a sponsored message for any of the gear that I've shared with you today. I'm just telling you about what I did. All in all, it was a great stream. Other than starting late, it went off without a hitch, and it was an easy payday for me, right? It was $1,500 just to show up, stream, and go home. I left the house to get there 2 hours early. I expected to begin by 3, so I left at 1. It started at 3:30. Supposedly, it didn't really start until 4:15, but I started streaming at 3:25. I got home by 6. So, actually, before 6. No, right at 6. I left my house door at 1. I got in at 6. I was there for 5 hours. I had $1,500 in my pocket to show for it, and I will likely sell a $700 upgrade on the end of it. Some of that means that if we talk about the business aspect of this, like why? Like if you were going to do this, what would you need to have? Well, definitely you would need YoloBox. I would not suggest trying this with anything else because YoloBox literally fits on top of the camera. You don't put your cell phone or you don't put your laptop on top of your camera. You're also going to need those Vaxis wireless transmitters. That's how you get the signal from one camera to another. You don't necessarily need YoloBox Pro, 2 cameras, so the original YoloBox would be fine. YoloBox Pro would give you even more ability, but you don't need YoloBox Pro, so either one of those would work. As you're continuing, you're going to need a power bank because when I was streaming, I plugged in a power bank to YoloBox just to make sure that I did not lose any power while I was streaming. And I did this actually a little bit after I began streaming and realized, I'm at 70%, let me just plug in the battery. So, other than that, you're going to need some wireless communication. You know, you're going to need some microphones. So what do? Well, you're going to need XLR microphones, and you're going to need or XLR breakout cables if you're trying to get something from the DJ or if your camera has it. And then you're going to need backups to your backup. So I actually came with 3 complete systems because I had my Comica BoomX-D, which is a 2.4 gigahertz system, 2-channel system. I had that with me. These are cheap systems. Cheap, maybe not the best word. Affordable. With sound, you really get what you pay for. I like the Comica. It works. The BoomX-D. I really like the BoomX-U quad because the UHF system, it seems to be working very well in a world that is now dominated by 2.4 gigahertz. I actually kind of like the UHF system again. And this is a flip-flop with the reversals. When wireless systems first came out a little over 20 years ago, they were so expensive I couldn't get into them. And then about 10 years ago when I started wanting to get into them, they were still expensive, but they were very crowded and there was a lot of stuff you had to do. And then about 5 to 7 years ago when 2.4 gigahertz started to open up a little differently, that meant that yeah, the wireless microphones were working well, and it wasn't as crowded. But now everything's 2.4. Like, there's 400 people there. They're all 2.4 gigahertz. So no wonder one of my microphones was having an issue with static and jumping and interference. So yeah, so I needed to switch from one to the other. So having both systems, 2 different ranges, was helpful. Now, for me, I could have very simply mic'd using the UHF system and probably not had any interference like I experienced on my left channel with my XSWD. But here's what happens. The XSWD literally plugs straight into my XLR jack. No connection needed, turn it on, it works just like a cable. In fact, that's how Sennheiser talks about it. So the ease of use became something that was helping me reduce the workload that day. Had I needed to use the Comica, I would have had to use breakout cables in order to get it in here, and then I would have had to find a different way to mount it. Recognize when you plug the XSWD system in, it's just plugged in with no wire, there's no mounting required, and then all of your options are over here on the audio. One thing about audio that I did have to make a concerted decision about. When recording audio on this is the HCX1, but also the UX180. They're almost identical, so either one are going to have the same. It really has to do with broadcast connections, output. That's the difference. Very similar to the X1500, 2000, and CX10. But what I had to make a decision was, with this, I'm only getting 16-bit audio, which meant that I had to make sure that my audio was on point. Had I connected my Zoom H6, I could have recorded in 24-bit audio with whatever sample rate that I wanted, but this one I was really only getting 16-bit audio at 48 kilohertz sample rate, and that's it. So it meant that I had a higher workload to make sure that I was managing my actual audio connection better. There's nothing really wrong with 16-bit audio, even 24-bit. There's a little more leeway in post-production with 24-bit, but you really want 32 for float. But that's a different story. Had I been recording in 32-bit float, I would not have had any benefit on a live stream, because the additional benefit you get from being able to recover over modulation or really low sounds that you can't even hear only comes when working in a 32-bit program like Premiere that then still exports out to a 24-bit signal. So the reality is, having something like the Portacapture X8 by Tascam, or that new Zoom, I think it's what, the F3, I forget which one it is, or even the F6, having that 32-bit float would not have helped for a live stream. It would have helped in post-production. Luckily, I set everything up nicely and didn't really need it, so there was no issue there. All in all, there's so much to talk about here. I could go on forever, but the reality is, I think I'm going to end it here, guys. If you have any comments or questions you want to talk about this, please let me know down in the comments below. I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you like this kind of content, please support it by hitting those Amazon links down below. Send me a cup of coffee through PayPal. And until next time we meet, I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Bye for now.